Welcome to the new episode of Startup Strides. Today, my guest is Jacob Shulman. He's the founder of Trivium Venture Network. Welcome, Jacob.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. I'm super excited.
Same here, man. We're both. I graduated, but we're both going to liberal arts colleges. I went to liberal arts college, so that's why I'm quite excited to learn more about the stuff you're doing right now, and also your overall thoughts, perspectives. I guess before I start with those questions, I looked into your LinkedIn and I saw that you as I said, you're going to Hamilton College, which is a liberal arts college, and also your background is primarily in humanities. How does pull towards entrepreneurship and venture capital first emerge in you?
Yeah, well, I've always been an entrepreneur at heart. In high school, my first gig was starting a landscaping company called Chilton Lawn Care, which was like your local boutique, student-led landscaping service. And we grew that over the course of 3 years to actually have about 70 clients. And that was my first love, that business. Everything, figuring out every client was different, doing different things, different yards. Every client had some unique request. I want to move this furniture there, this pot there. We were always happy to do it. And from that, I just fell in love with entrepreneurship and got involved in a few other things and, got into the humanities, which, we can go into later, how I think it's a great setup to become a successful entrepreneur. And what we're seeing out of the NESCAC schools, Hamilton, Amherst, Williams, Tufts, schools like that. But yeah, happy to dive into this.
Yeah, it was a nice segue into my next question because one thing I'm curious about your thoughts because there are a lot of conversations around. Obviously, if you go to Stanford, MIT, Caltech, I mean, you're exposed to that environment of tech and entrepreneurship, and it's a lot more. But in your opinion, what kind of edge does the liberal arts environment, college education, provide compared to more traditional, technical or business education?
So there's not that, ecosystem that exists at Stanford or Harvard where people are dropping out left and right to go to YC all the time, right? And I wish there was some sort of that culture. The culture is more focused on going to med school or going to law school or banking on Wall Street. But the reason why I think little Ivies, NESCACs, non-traditional schools make some of the most successful founders in the long run. And I think the data proves this. There's been about 20 unicorns that have come out of NESCAC schools in the last 20 years, disproportionately a very high number. It's because you have to figure things out. If I'm writing a 25-page history paper, I don't know that. I need to use all the resources I can possibly get. And it's kind of like starting a company in a way in which you need to utilize all your resources, not just your professors, but the students around you on campus to build something. If you want to succeed, it's got to be creative. It's got to be extraordinary, just like a startup.
Fair enough. I think what you are saying really makes sense, and also I feel like another thing would be um, sort of that broad exposure, right? Not having that super specialization into one single thing or two things. I feel like after going to Amherst, really the way I think about things have changed quite a bit too. Um, and I think I personally see an edge there too. But another thing I'm curious about is how does it compare, especially in terms of like the conviction and your approach when you're building a company, on a smaller, less founder dense campus versus, environment where, as you said, people are dropping out to start startups constantly. Like, how do you see the differences there?
First of all, everyone knows who you are. You're that guy starting a startup. So it's a bit of extra free media attention. But I totally agree with what you were saying a little bit before as well. You can always find a technical co-founder, right? And there's not that hyper fixation on a space. A lot of people at Hamilton or at Amherst, I'd assume, will be environmental, gov, and history, or math, econ, and sociology, or just random combinations of things like that. And to run a business, you need to be proficient or at least be able to find ways to help you run many different aspects of the business, whether it's, your go-to market strategy or working on the product or raising capital. There's a lot of different components that you have to figure out to run a business. And maybe you're not the best at one of those segments, but you understand how to find the help you need to make it all work.
That's so fair. And in terms of like the people you see and come across, because I've been seeing startups coming out of Amherst, quite successful, by the way, as you mentioned, despite the size of the colleges and size of the people. Um, but do you feel like there's like a certain sector or focus areas you tend to see NESCAC, affiliated founders gravitate towards more, or is there like a recurring domain? Is what I'm trying to ask.
I don't think so. I think there's a lot of AI, Trivium, the network for the NESCAC. We're industry agnostic, so we feature companies from consumer uh, goods to AI, B2B SaaS, and everything in between. Obviously, you see a lot more of that these days, just because that's what the market is populated with. But I don't think going to a small liberal arts school makes you any more inclined to go into a particular sector of the startup market. Nor does it make you necessarily more likely to be an entrepreneur. But if you're going to go down that path, I think it does make you more likely to be successful.
And you're exposed to a lot of founders, through which we're going to talk more about Trivium soon. And you're quite exposed to that ecosystem. I'm wondering, is there like a certain NESCAC founder archetype? And if there is, how would you describe it?
If I had to use one word to describe the NESCAC, it would be, um, quirky. I think that's an interesting word to use, but I think people are very creative, but everyone has a little bit of quirkiness to them. They're not necessarily the cookie cutter type archetype that goes through college, getting their major, and then goes into a sales job and works their way up. I think everyone in the NESCAC, either they play some niche sport like squash, or they're interested in the outing club, or just something about them that makes them particularly interesting. And I think people coming out of NESCAC schools, a lot of liberal arts schools, I know this is pretty general, but just has something about them that's just a little bit extra.
And if you could compare, I mean, we already kind of touched upon it, but I would like you to expand a bit. If you could compare it to more traditional, tech background people, founders, do you think there's certain things that they bring to the table that are often underestimated?
Yeah, some of the most important things I think to build a startup is the ability, from what I've seen on other podcasts and reading books about it, is the ability to never quit, right? Always move forward, to be creative, to know when to pivot, um, to know how to form a relationship with people. Ultimately, an early stage venture, right? You're investing in people. You're not investing in anything else, especially before the seed round. That's a lot of what Trivium does as well. And I think some of the best people in the world go to NESCAC schools, play Division 3 sports just because they want to play the sport and compete. But all of us recognize we're not going to be professional athletes like the D1 people, but we just love to play for the sake of the game and the competitiveness.
Yeah, that's so true. And I guess I want to ask a follow up question from what you just said. How do you think being an athlete helps if you want to become a founder, especially sort of like is that a being part of that environment, part of that culture in a way or shape or form, kind of pushes people towards becoming a founder?
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of, being on a sports team just for the sake of being on a team. That's why I love playing squash in college. I don't think it's quintessential to, being a successful entrepreneur, but I've spoken to a lot of investors that are more likely to invest in student athletes, whether that's at the D1 or D3 level, just because they think it's more likely that that individual will have some sort of extra drive. Sports are tough games. They're games of inches, and it's tough to win. It's tough to compete, especially when you're not maybe the most physically talented person in the world. And I think that brings a lot out. And especially among the NESCAC conference is has some of the best D3 sports in the country. And I just wrote one of my last newsletters on this. The numbers are pretty fascinating.
Um, and yeah, when you look at certain companies, PayPal, Tesla, etc., you tend to see these mafias, right? Like the PayPal mafia, etc.
Mhm.
I'm curious, is there like a NESCAC mafia does that exist?
Yeah, I think there's plenty of them. You look at Netflix, which was founded by a combination of Mark Randolph and Reed Hastings. Mark studied geology at Hamilton. Reed, I think, did political science or some sort of government thing at Bowdoin. These were people that just came together and thought they could fix the DVD industry and became the giant that it is today. There's others like Zoom Info, Minted, other just massive. I wouldn't even call them unicorns, megacorns, or whatever the term is for them. But That's obviously the tip of the iceberg. But I think the more what I'm looking at, especially with Trivium, is just the number of NESCAC alumni that go into entrepreneurship that become particularly successful.
And how does that network compare to more traditional feeder ecosystems like at Ivy League or Stanford?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, not really reinventing the wheel here. Every college that produces, or every sector of the market that produces successful entrepreneurs should have some sort of angel or venture group to support those founders. So I think three or four of them exist at Harvard. Same thing for Stanford and MIT. I'm just doing the same thing for the NESCAC, which I think is an undertapped portion of the market. And if you look at the venture market more broadly, you see it changing. Like institutional funds are changing to adapting, and people are realizing things like people with podcasts, people that can reach audiences, are just as valuable to the entrepreneur as capital. You see that. And so there's also just portions of the venture market that have been, I think, underlooked for people that come out of Stanford and are going to build the next Airbnb and DoorDash. So I think the venture market is changing, and I'm just trying to be a part of that.
That's so fair. Could you expand on it a bit more, like in terms of like the changes you're seeing right now?
Well, yeah, sure. I'll shout out another NESCAC company called Bullet Pitch, founded by this guy, Brett, who was on the Middlebury swim team a few years ago. He's a few years out of school. He focuses on venture media. What venture media does is basically put creators on cap tables, to, use his words. And so they realized that one of the big portions of venture is not just the capital provided to the entrepreneur, but also the audience that they can provide. And I think Bullet Pitch is doing a great job with that. And there's just other areas of the market, like NESCAC founders, that are underserved because the traditional VCs are so big and only look at repeat founders coming out of Stanford.
And was this the main or like the predominant reason why you decided to go and create Trivium Venture Network?
I wouldn't say it's the dominant reason, but as I've gotten deeper and deeper into it, I've just discovered this by talking to people like you that are very involved in the market, and others. The main reason why I found it is because I love entrepreneurship. I love talking to founders. And I had so many conversations, just basic networking conversations with, entrepreneurs or angel investors that came out of Williams or Tufts or Hamilton, and they just felt like they were alone. They just felt like kind of an outsider to the VC conversation because of their background, when they should have been, a standout. And that's kind of how we got going on Trivium.
Okay, so essentially seeing this lack of exposure in the NESCAC ecosystem made you be like, okay, I think we need to find a way to not only connect these different schools, but also like increase the exposures they have to the VCs. Is that right?
Yeah, I'll give you one specific example. I talked to, a founder from Hamilton, creating this company called Grid, which is a social networking platform that connects people based on place instead of swiping. Um, you know, and this individual was featured on a very exclusive newsletter highlighting some of the fastest growing, best, most high potential startups coming out there. He was the only one with a NESCAC background on that feature. The other 10 or so were Harvard, Stanford, and because of that, he was overlooked. And he said it was much harder to raise capital, to gain exposure, because people take one quick glance and it's like, oh, maybe this guy doesn't have what it takes. He doesn't have the technical knowledge, even though I think him being able to make that newsletter, or whatever the feature was so much more impressive and deserves recognition.
That's really cool. And when there are some scout networks and sort of like a student investment groups at schools like Harvard, Stanford, etc. Um, how does it compare? Like, how do you compare Trivium for the people who are hearing about it for the first time? How do you compare that to more traditional kind of like scout angel groups? And what do you do differently?
Mhm. So Trivium's not technically affiliated with any of the NESCAC tools. We don't use the logo, but what we do is try to get boots on the ground at all 11 of the NESCAC schools. Each of them have some sort of entrepreneurial ecosystem, and a lot of it is embryonic. It's a very young student founded club, or something like Eye to Eye at Amherst, for example, or Jumbo Ventures at Tufts, or Hamilton Ventures at Hamilton, Mid Futures. There's all these individual ones for each of the schools that are trying to catalyze the entrepreneurial environment on their campuses. And so at Trivium, we have interns at many of the schools that help with the sourcing, help with the early diligence. So we're trying to develop relationships with these clubs and these people from a very young age, so that when they graduate the schools, and maybe after they work IB jobs and start their own companies, that they go to Trivium first for connections and capital. And I think a lot of the NESCAC is pivoting towards the direction of entrepreneurship. People see that liberal arts is the future, especially with things like AI, but also entrepreneurship is the future, and this is the age to start your own business. And a lot of these schools are starting to recognize that, and the amount of engagement with these clubs on campus demonstrates that.
And so just to clarify for myself, when you guys come in, like, is it at the pre-seed stage, seed stage? Is it at what stages of the startup life do you guys come in?
Well, we'll feature you in our newsletter, which goes exclusively to our angel syndicate of about 40 NESCAC affiliated accredited investors. Is anytime you're looking to raise, but specifically we're looking to make angel investments, SPVs, between 100,000 and 2 million. So between that friends and family and seed stage round, or between the friends and family and Series A, because we want to show high quality companies to our investor network. One thing we're not doing is we're not showing student ideas that you came up with your buddy in the dining room. We want to show that once you actually have an MVP, actually have product market founder fit, and then we want to make it product market founder investor fit.
Got it. And in terms of the investors backing you, the Trivium's investor members, who are they? Can you give me any examples?
Yeah, of course. So I'm not going to give specific examples, but I'll say that we have board members from many of the NESCAC schools. It's a very robust, diverse group, is what I like to say. So it's not all all exclusively in angel investors. There's also about maybe a quarter of them that are actually GPs and have their own funds, but look to invest in Trivium in a personal capacity. So there's a lot of GPs, there's a lot of full-time angel investors, there's a lot of ex-founders, CEOs, people that run their own businesses. Anyone that's looking to take part in a dual mission, actually a three-part mission. One, giving back to underrepresented NESCAC entrepreneurs. Two, making lucrative, successful investments. And three, getting to meet the other LPs or investors in the network. That's a triple value add to the people in that network, and always looking to build that. So if you're listening to this and you're interested in high quality early stage deal flow from NESCAC schools, or meeting other LPs associated with these schools, would love to have a conversation with you.
So it's not just the idea of potential returns. There's also NESCAC spirits that's tying those LPs towards it, right?
Yeah, it's a marketplace. So trying to always build both sides of the market space, startups and investors. And, a lot of people I talk to say that's where most of the value comes in for them. They have plenty of deal flow, but they're really interested in meeting in other NESCAC focused VC funds, things like that.
There. Are there any standout moments or sort of like highlights that you can give us any examples of from Trivium? And looking ahead, I guess, where do you hope to see Trivium, I guess, will be in the future going forward?
Yeah, highlights. So I wish we were having this conversation in a few days, because we're about to, cross the T's and dot the I's of our first SPV investment, 6 figures, into a very high potential startup founded by 3 Hamilton alumni, hoping to break that news on our website and LinkedIn soon. I've had so many highlights, conversations with a lot of interesting people I never get the chance to be on the phone with. People on our board, including co-managing partner of Teal Capital, just people that it's pretty hard to get in conversation with, especially as a senior in college. But that's also, a little bit of my secret sauce. Reaching out as a student, people are a little bit more likely to, feel bad and have a few words with me. And then on the founder side, our first pitch call was a huge milestone, because that's a chance where I think we got to see it all come together. I had 20 angel investors on the call, companies pitching. It went pretty smoothly, no technical issues. That was a big relief. And I think people could start to see that this wasn't just an idea, but it was also reality. And then one more thing I want to touch on is the first time I received merch from a company in the mail. I think that's when my mom realized that it was pretty legit. I received these cans of special water called Main Love in the mail. Shout out to Jen for sending those, CEO of Main Love, and that was awesome. That was awesome.
I think that's one of the most beautiful moments when you feel like, okay, actually this is paying off in one way or another, right?
Mhm.
You are technically a founder. You started this, but I'm curious, what made you kind of go after more investment side of things instead of just going and starting your own thing?
That's a good question. There's a few reasons for that. One, I'm not super technical. Two, this is the best idea I had. And I have a little bit of investing background. I have some FINRA licenses like Series 7, Series 63. I did some internships in consulting and wealth management. My long term goal was really always to get into VC. And then, I forget who it was, but a conversation was like, "Oh, you want to found, a company with the eventual goal of going into VC? Well, why don't you just join a VC company now?" I was like, "Well, because I haven't, worked at a bank for 10 years or started a company." And then they were like, "Why don't you just start a company?" I was like, "Well, I can do that. Why don't I just start a venture company?" Well, what is venture, right? It's just connecting people with capital, and that's based on a certain niche, and that's what Trivium does. We connect accredited investors with people that started companies coming out of the particular niche of a liberal arts school.
Fair enough. We are coming towards the end of our episode, so I'm going to ask more reflection-based questions, especially from the things
Mhm.
you've seen and experienced. But we talked about a lot of good things that the liberal arts environment provides in terms of edge and in thinking, in approach, etc. But what do you think can be done to improve, to foster a better entrepreneurial culture on the campus?
Time's important. I think just as the industry changes, more people become more ambitious. Um, More things that will foster entrepreneurship. Like Hamilton, right now, we have this creative initiative of people on campus just coming up with ideas. Um, I think the Trivium is going to be a big part of that, fostering, catalyzing the liberal arts ecosystem. When people realize that there's a place to go to be connected, to raise capital, more people are going to start businesses, hopefully in the long run. And then, yeah, people that have been successful, giving back, providing advice. I know the career centers help a lot with this on campus, but I think time is the biggest part.
When, a lot of people start, as you said, liberal arts education with the purpose of either going to med school or pre-law or, pre-PhD or consulting and finance, right? And it's like, it's quite linear. You don't really get to a lot of chance to explore and get out of that, um, I guess, echo chamber, right? What would you advise to people who are just starting their education or at the beginning of their, undergrad year? What can they do to explore this entrepreneurial drive a bit more?
They try everything. I think a lot of people go into college, whether it's at a liberal arts school or more traditional institution. I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm going to go into industry. And so they study one major. One of the great things about some liberal arts schools like Hamilton is you have an open curriculum. So if you take advantage of that, and take classes, like I think my freshman fall, I took things in economics, chemistry, sociology, history, and ended up going more towards the humanities side just because they're the most interesting to me. But the opportunity to explore, meet people from a lot of different backgrounds, that's more likely that an idea will pop up or a conversation or someone you'll meet that will just spark some type of synergy to create an idea and start a business. But entrepreneurship isn't meant for most people. I know it's a long and lonely road, and I know we mentioned some highlights of that at the beginning too. Sometimes you feel like you're totally lost, and so for anyone listening to this, I just want them to know that too. If you think IB is best for you, or you think pre med is right for you, you go down that path, and that's sometimes the even though something like pre-med is a long path, it's a very straightforward path. You know what you need to do, and that structure is definitely a blessing sometimes.
Sure. So I'm going to ask you my final question, which is somebody watching, perhaps a student or aspiring founder on a campus. what advice would you have for them, and also how they can, I guess, reach out to you? What they can do if they want to, reach out to Trivium Venture?
Yeah, there's plenty of ways to reach me. You can reach out to Trivium at info@triviumvn.com. You can go to our website, triviumvn.org. Um, you can contact, you can leave a comment below in the YouTube link or however you're watching this. But always great to meet new people. There's so many what I call kind of like side calls that I have that lead to something fruitful, whether it's there's investor calls and there's calls with startups, and then there's calls with advisors, and then there's just random calls that I have with people that are totally unrelated to Trivium at all, that we end up having some mutual connection and are able to help each other out. Yeah.
Jacob, thank you so much for this episode. I cannot wait to hear and see all the cool things you do. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Javid, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. I think what you're doing is awesome. I mean, you're a good example of this. Amherst kid has his own podcast, has had some super prestigious guests on the podcast, and I've listened to some of those conversations, and they're always super interesting and help with my development. And wish you the best of luck with your new job in London.
Thank you, brother.